What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Marinoni Time. I'm Alex Marinoni, and today it's going to be all about the NFL draft, with, of course, a little XFL sprinkled in. I have a special guest today who's going to help me do that. He covers the NFL for Overtime Heroics and covers the XFL for the XFL News Hub. His name's Mike Mitchell. Mike, thanks so much for coming on the show, and I hope you and your family and everybody's doing well during this crazy COVID-19 pandemic.
Same to you, Alex. Thank you very much for having me on. Unfortunately, I've had two separate people within my family who passed as a result of the coronavirus. It's not something I really wanted to talk about right out the gate, but it's a scary, scary time for people and for everyone out there. So, it's very tough. You know, we lean on sports as a distraction to get us away from the ugliness of the real world. And unfortunately, at this time, we've kind of lost sports for a bit, but the NFL draft kind of gave us, it was a saving grace. It gave fans the sense that everything was back to normal, at least if only for a few days.
Right, and I'm sorry to hear about that. I hope everyone does well going forward for you guys, but I agree 100% that that's what sports is. It's that escape, and to have the NFL draft back, I feel like it was one of the most highly anticipated drafts in a long time because of what's going on. Everybody was tuned in. I typically don't stare at the screen on day 3 the way I did, but I was all about it. So, and I think a lot of other fans were the same way.
And no question, I'm a long-time football fan. Been watching football since I was 5 years old, and I've been such a huge fan of the NFL draft. It's part of the reason why I've covered, I guess you could call it alternative leagues. And I've been a day 3, day 4 guy. I remember when the draft was 12 rounds, and I've always had a fascination and a deep knowledge of all the players that are available for these drafts. So it's exciting for the players. It's exciting for football. I think during a time of a pandemic, the only type of sporting event we could have at the moment is a draft, and they had to be real creative with it and the virtual draft. And the NFL did a very good job. We got a peek into people's homes, which is interesting, their family life and all that. It was very cool to see, and it was obviously the only way we could see a sporting event like this at this time. But it was refreshing to be able to focus in on football and the draft and all these great college players that came out. So it was a lot of fun for sure.
Yeah, I definitely agree, especially with the way the draft was handled. I was honestly low-key. It was kind of like, I kind of hope there's at least one glitch somewhere just for laughs, maybe like in the 6th round, something that doesn't mean as much.
That's a good point. I've been a part of fantasy drafts in the past, and I was kind of hoping that, I've been with fantasy drafts with relatives and friends and all that, and a lot of times we've had to pause the draft because somebody's having an issue. So I was waiting for one of those moments, which would have been funny, if I agree.
Yeah, I was going to say immediately, they can go through what we have to go through now as fantasy owners and what we have to deal with, that it's no joke having some of the internet cut out or somebody drops the laptop or something. Those are real life issues that are now happening in the NFL. But let's get to the NFL, and right off the bat, who were some of the winners and losers of this year's NFL draft?
You have to like what the Bengals did. I know that's an easy answer. Anytime you get a franchise quarterback and then supplementing it with very good talent, I thought Dallas did a very good job. I thought they stole CeeDee Lamb, getting him where they did, and I think Trayvon Diggs could instantly start for them at corner. So losers, I think the consensus among a lot of NFL circles and football fans is that the Green Bay Packers did not do a very good job of supporting Aaron Rodgers. They picked up a running back in A.J. Dillon. Obviously, they drafted Jordan Love. That's where a lot of the controversy and the criticism stems from. I think Green Bay is an interesting franchise in that, they rely on their draft to be the lifeblood of their football team. And they've had very good drafts over the years. They've been a contending team for a long time. They feel like a team that's pretty close to contending for a championship, and I don't know if the draft helped them advance forward. So, you don't want to call anybody losers a day or two after the draft because you never know how these players will turn out. It's even difficult giving teams grades, but I don't think Green Bay did themselves any real big favors.
Yeah, and I think, like you said earlier, that the Packers are a team that typically drafts very well, and the fans are used to that. I think that's why it's exaggerated a little bit, because since they do such a nice job building the depth through the draft and not relying on big ticket free agents, that the fact that they didn't get anybody that they felt maybe in the first couple of rounds to help Aaron Rodgers, like you said, really set them back. I mean, to trade up to get Aaron Rodgers as replacement, I thought that was a little head scratching, because if you're going to get Aaron Rodgers' replacement, you really don't want to use other assets to do that, since it's not an immediate rush.
Right, and here's one of the elements. Yesterday, I believe it was, Adam Schefter was talking about the importance of getting a backup quarterback, and that's not really groundbreaking insight. But the reason he gave for it was, unfortunately, because of the coronavirus pandemic. He talked about what if your starting quarterback were to contract the virus and he'd be out. And it's now more than ever, it's more important to have a backup quarterback that's ready to go. The thing with that is, I don't know that Jordan Love is somebody he's a developmental quarterback, in my opinion. So I don't know if he's ready to take on that task if he were to be thrust. Green Bay Packers fans are going to pray that nothing ever happens to Aaron Rodgers and they don't have to see Jordan Love in the 2020 season whenever it happens. So, yeah, it's tough because you're in a conference there where you got the Niners, obviously defending NFC champs, and then Tom Brady's in the conference now, and you got Drew Brees and all these other top teams. So it's going to be very competitive in the NFC. And, Green Bay fans are, a little ticked off because they feel that their team could have done better in the draft, improving the supporting cast around Aaron. When you look at guys like Brees and Brady, they definitely got the weapons around. Those are two teams that won, if you want to call it that. The Saints didn't have that many picks, but, they did a very good job with the limited amount of picks that they had, and obviously Tampa's done an excellent job all offseason. So it's going to be an interesting conference for sure. I just don't know. I don't know if Green Bay is ready to challenge for the championship in that conference.
Yeah, and that's coming off a team that just won, 12, 13 games. So to not look to improve immediately with those early picks, I thought was very interesting, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I think everybody's worried about Aaron Rodgers, but he figured it out at some point, and he makes it work. The fact that the 49ers ran through them during the regular season and in the playoffs the way they did, and they didn't really address that early on, I thought that was more interesting than anything.
I have to agree with you on that. Green Bay's defense is their Achilles heel. Even though Mike Benton's done a good job with that unit, they were exposed in the playoffs. Hopefully they improve in this coming season and all that, but they could have done more to address that area for sure.
Absolutely. And another team that I'm not going to call them losers. I'll never call them losers. They're absolutely not losers. So a team that I guess left me head scratching a little bit, but I really should learn by now not to question it, is the New England Patriots. I mean, this is a team who struggled offensively all year, that were carried by their defense. And with the first 3 picks of the draft, they went defense and didn't address the wide receiver issue that they had. And is Jarrett Stidham really going to start at quarterback for this team?
Yeah, it looks that way, unless they pull the trigger for somebody like a Jacoby Brissett and bring him back into the fold. And the Colts drafted a quarterback this weekend during the draft. So I think, it looks like it's going to be the Stidham show. And, there's a method to the Patriots' madness, so it's kind of hard to criticize them when they've been so successful over the years. But I guess this is the time to do it. They stockpiled on a lot of picks for them like they normally do, trading up and down and all over the place. And I don't know if they picked up Marquise Lee recently to improve themselves a little bit at wide receiver. It's not a roster that's going to overwhelm you by any stretch of the imagination. They like Dalton Keene and the other tight end that they drafted. So we'll see how it goes for them. But there's some doubt towards New England, I think rightfully so, even though it's hard to doubt Bill Belichick at any point.
Absolutely. That's why I don't even like saying that I'm doing that. But I did have to point out that I was left a little interested on what their choices were, especially going Division II player with that early pick. But let's stay in division and let's go to our team, the New York Jets. I think this is a situation where, for the first time in a very, very long time, Jets fans were left thrilled after day 3.
I think Joe Douglas did a tremendous job. He flipped the script. Instead of overpaying for free agents and veteran players out there, he put the priority on building the Jets culture and improving the roster with the draft. So the draft was priority number 1. So all the off-season free agency was used as a way to supplement the roster and build up the depth, and then it led to the draft. I thought the Jets did a very good job in drafting players that were team captains and guys with huge upside, like Mekhi Becton and obviously Denzel Mims. And I think Cameron Clark was a steal getting him where they got him, and I think he could be a future starter there. I see a lot of potential starters there. Bryce Hall at corner, guy who had a lot of adversity in college, was considered a top corner before having a severe left leg injury during the season on a special teams play there for the Cavaliers. So I think Joe Douglas did a very good job bringing in the right character guys and fortifying positions throughout, and the offensive line just sticks out. The Jets have gone from one of the least talented offensive lines in football to one of the deepest now through the moves they made in free agency and now in the draft.
Absolutely, and that was Joe Douglas's main point of focus when he first came. It was to help Sam and to really rebuild that offensive line. And he saw enough from last year to know that this team needed an overhaul. And I think they're only bringing back 3 players from last year. And I think if you asked any Jet fan which 2 or 3 linemen you'd bring back, those are the ones between Winters, Harrison, and Adoba. So the fact that he was able to position around that, which I thought was very good, especially through the draft, like you said, I was really taken away by his defensive choices. I love the versatility that Ashton Davis will bring to this defense, and I'm very excited to see what he can do, what Greg Williams can do with him.
Yeah, no question about it. It's going to be interesting because he can play in the nickel. He can play as a nickel linebacker. He can play deep safety. Pro Football Focus had him rated as one of the top cover safeties in all of college football the last couple of years. So he's another one of these high character guys who has versatility and can play in several different areas. And obviously, big benefit would be if he could be a dynamic returner for the Jets. It's an area that the Jets could use, after losing Andre Roberts, who was a Pro Bowler for them a couple of years ago. So it's a pick with a lot of upsides, and it might be something for the future, too, depending on what the Jets decide to do with Marcus May moving forward. Talented player, like a couple of the players in the Jets class, there are questions whether or not, these guys were like Ashton Davis and Bryce Hall were red flagged in terms of injuries, medical concerns. Obviously the period we're in, it's kind of hard to do a lot of medical testing and all this kind of stuff. But I think Davis definitely provides a lot of versatility to the roster, and he's going to be an exciting player to watch.
Yeah, and what I like about it is the thought of having a lot of 3 safety sets. And like you said, when the Jets first drafted him, I was thinking, all right, this is Marcus May's replacement after next year because they're going to have to sign Adams and May. So if they have to choose one, obviously it's going to be Adams. But for this season, if Davis can make that leap and become that third safety, that starting caliber player in a lot of packages, you're looking at 3 safety sets where you can have Davis and May roaming around or picking up man, and then you're letting Jamal Adams really do what he does best, and that's disrupt things at the line of scrimmage on a more consistent basis. Yeah,
the potential is there for the Jets to have the best safety group in all of football. And, anytime you have a safety like Davis who can cover as much ground as he can, he can be a big asset towards the cornerbacks that are on the team, being able to cover that range and make up for any corners that have issues on the outside with the wide receivers there. So, yeah, it looks very promising. On paper, the Jets look to have one of the best safety trios in the league.
Now let's transition to their stadium mates, the New York Giants. I was very surprised that they went tackle, even though it's a position of need, the offensive line, especially with the way Soldier has struggled. To go Georgia offensive tackle Andrew Thomas, I thought was very interesting considering Isaiah Simmons was sitting there right there.
Yeah, and Isaiah Simmons can be a difference maker in terms of how much talent he has. He's another player that's extremely versatile and can do so many things. The Giants can certainly use a star on the defensive end, particularly in their front seven, to kind of be a catalyst for their defense. So I'm sure they considered Simmons. I think, the fact that they have so much invested in Daniel Jones, who showed well last year after a lot of people doubted the Giants picking him. And the fact that they have Saquon Barkley, who kind of struggled, and a lot of that had to do with injuries, but it also had to do with the supporting cast in front of him blocking for him. So I can see why they went the clean route and took Andrew Thomas, who's kind of a clean and a safe pick. They can plug him right in there. We'll see what they do with Nate Solder and everything else. But, Simmons was definitely someone that they could have considered to help fortify their defense.
Absolutely, and I saw on day 3 was really when the Giants went defense, taking 4 linebackers, adding a corner, and then obviously in the second round taking safety from Alabama, Xavier McKinney. So I thought they did have the right train of thought later on in the draft. Just it was very interesting, and I guess to your point with Saquon, a lot of that was injury, but the fact that he wasn't Saquon of rookie year, I think that scared the Giants a little bit because they know they have a talented back there, and there's got to be another reason why that he wasn't as effective as he was his rookie year. So grabbing Andrew Thomas and even Pert from in the third round from Oregon. I'm sorry, that's Shane Lemieux from Oregon. Pert was from Connecticut. So grabbing him to possibly be that rotational piece, maybe a soldier insurance at some point, I thought was important.
Yeah, the two most important players on the Giants are Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley. How do you make their job easier? Get a premium offensive lineman. So I get the rationale behind Gettleman's decision there.
Now let's move over to Carolina with Matt Rule, his first draft. He takes in the 5th round an XFL player, a guy that we're very familiar with, Kenny Robinson. What did you think about him going to Carolina, and did you think he would go before the 5th round?
I did think he would. I'll put it this way: I thought he should have gone by the 3rd round or even the 2nd round. I understand safeties don't get quite the priority that other positions do. It's very rare that safeties will flood the 1st round, but I'm not surprised that he went in the 5th round. I think, there's it's not a talent thing. I think, whatever issues he had academically there and the issues that he had at West Virginia, small sample, which was excellent, by the way, in the XFL, 5 games, he played excellent football. His coaches and his teammates raved about him. He played with NFL veterans there like Will Hill. So I think Carolina's draft was very interesting. I think it picked up a very good free safety. I can see Kenny Robinson being a starter in the league for 5-10 years plus. So I don't think this is your typical 5th round pick where the guy's just a depth piece. I really think Kenny Robinson has great upside. Pro Football Focus, when Robinson was at West Virginia, rated him as one of the top 3 coverage safeties in the nation. So, and he graded him out that way. So, so I think he's a spectacular young player who has a lot of range, ball skills. The upside is immense, and I think him playing with pro football players in the XFL will only enhance his ability to transition to being in the NFL.
Yeah, and you made a good point early on, and it was one of my biggest takeaways when I saw the Panthers drafted him was that they were talking about how Matt Rule and his coaching staff really took a lot of information from the Battlehawks coaching staff and how they raved about him, like you mentioned. And I thought that was a big deal because unlike college coaches who want recruits and other players to see them talking their game up, they may not believe all that because they have to do that in order to get their recruits and to make everybody feel good. XFL coaches, especially now that there's no more XFL, they have nothing to gain from talking up a player. If anything, it's losing credibility at this point because it doesn't gain them in any way. So the fact that the whole coaching staff and the team was raving about Kenny Robinson says a lot about what he was able to accomplish for 5 weeks there.
Yeah, and he got very good coaching. He being Kenny Robinson got very good coaching from Tim Lewis, longtime defensive coach in the National Football League, and he raved about him obviously. And then playing with guys like Will Hill, veteran NFL safety, and all these veterans raved about Kenny Robinson. So he went to like graduate school, pro football graduate school by playing in the XFL. And then, like you said, which is a very good point, these coaches had nothing to gain by talking up a player. That were, obviously because unfortunately the XFL folded and all that. So I think Kenny Robinson, it worked out well. It's a shame because he was probably going to end up being a trailblazer for the XFL because as a result of him being drafted into the NFL, more players who were in that transfer portal would have considered playing in the XFL in years 2 and 3 and beyond. So it was a good gamble on his part. It worked out well for him. I'm happy for him, and it's going to be interesting to follow his career in Carolina.
Now, with Kenny Robinson, he made the 33rd player from the XFL signed to either an NFL or a CFL contract so far. So from the players that were signed, is there any that you think is going to make an immediate impact as a starter day one?
That's a very good question. I think, one guy who's kind of like under the radar that I know the Steelers signed a bunch of XFL players is Jaron Jones, the offensive tackle from Notre Dame, who was a starting left tackle for the New York Guardians. I thought he really came on, and this was his first opportunity. He's a former college defensive tackle at Notre Dame. And in the NFL, he's been on practice squads, but he's never really gotten an opportunity to get on the field and play. And I think he's got a lot of upside. And I could see him, it's difficult because the Steelers do have a good offensive line. I could see him being a future starter in the league. A lot of the guys who signed with NFL teams straight out of the XFL are players that have already had, I guess, for lack of a better term, a cup of coffee in the NFL. Younger guys. I think one of the better players was DeMarquise Gates from the Roughnecks. He's somebody who should be a starter in the National Football League because he's a three-down linebacker. He made big play after big play at Houston, and I can see him breaking into that Vikings lineup, even though that, once again, that's another really strong unit, which is hard to break into. So there are some very good players. The two most high-profile players that went from the XFL to the NFL are obviously P.J. Walker and Jordan Teamo. I think both guys have great upside. They're very young. Teamo could be somebody who, Andy Reid, who's got a great history of developing young quarterbacks, he's someone who's got a lot of upside. I can see him one day being a starter in the National Football League. That's how highly I think of him as in terms of his football character, his character as a human being, and his physical skill set. He's part of the wave of new age quarterbacks who have the ability to run RPO, run pass option, and have the mobility and the arm strength and the talent to play at the next level, which is the NFL.
Absolutely. I agree with all those points. And I love the Jaron Jones pick because he's a guy who, like you said, all these guys had basically had a cup of coffee for the most part in the NFL already. Jones played for about 5 teams, so he definitely got the looks and already the interest from different NFL teams to have fill in for certain weeks or whatnot. So being able to refine his skills with the Guardians in the XFL definitely proved a long way. And I agree with you. I think he's going to at some point crack a starting job in the NFL. 2 players that I thought who I think can make an immediate impact, both are Chargers. Donald Parham, who really bursted on the scene for the Renegades this year, and Storm Norton, who was ranked the best offensive lineman in the XFL. I think those 2 guys have an opportunity to make a day one splash for the Chargers.
I think those are 2 very good players you brought up there, and they obviously Parham's in a situation where he's playing behind or with the way teams use 2 tight ends. And obviously Hunter Henry, who's had issues with durability. Parham, as he was coined Starham, has definitely got all the traits you're looking for. Was a dominant player in the FCS level at Stetson, and then dominated in the XFL. What's not to like about him? And Storm Norton was excellent. So, and the Chargers, there's some wiggle room there for him to potentially crack that starting lineup. So I like both those players.
Now, for some of the players that didn't get chosen, I know when I post my list every time a player gets signed, I constantly am flooded with, why hasn't Cam Phillips been signed? So let me ask you, why hasn't Cam Phillips been signed yet?
I think it's strange. I think the reason why Cam Phillips ended up out of the NFL, even though he's a former practice squatter with the Buffalo Bills, is because, unfortunately, this happens. This is why a league like the XFL was valuable. This happens with a lot of players. Unfortunately, when it comes to the wide receiver position, if you do not crack the starting 3, you have to bring special teams value to the table. Cam Phillips was a superstar wide receiver at Virginia Tech, and he broke records there. But he had no experience whatsoever as covering kicks or returning kicks, and so it was difficult for him to stick on a roster as the 4th, 5th, 6th, or maybe even 7th guy. I think Phillips will eventually land somewhere. He's got to be patient, and he's got to pick the perfect spot for him, because if he goes into an NFL camp, provided that there are camps, if he goes into a camp and he's 6th or 7th in the pecking order, if he does not provide value on special teams, he's going to have a hard time cracking, because Phillips is a starting wide receiver. He's a pro football starting wide receiver as far as I'm concerned. So he has the hands, he has the route ability, he can make big plays down the field, he can play inside or outside. So I think he's a starter. The problem is NFL teams already have their starters in place. So cracking those roster gaps and getting in there and finding a space where you'll fit on an NFL roster is difficult for players like Cam Phillips. So I think he'll sign at some point. I think once teams get through the undrafted process and all that and finalize that, I think Phillips will land somewhere. The question is where, and where will he have the best opportunity to potentially make an NFL roster.
I agree with that. I think that's going to be the same for a number of guys. I think some of these players went on early, but I think after this, the undrafted free agent process works out, and even if they're patient and towards camp, you're going to know there's going to be a bunch of players taken, and who better than taking guys that were just playing professional football just a few months ago.
Yeah, it's big. I think one of the things that's hindering or hurting the XFL players right now is obviously the current state that we're in, where players can't have physicals, can't meet with teams, So that has kind of hindered the signing process. Although quite a few players, as you mentioned at the top there, have signed already with NFL and CFL teams. So, and there'll be more in the future there, but it makes it a little bit more difficult in the current state that we're in for players to be locked in and sign with NFL teams. So opportunity is important, and where you land is very important.
Now, who do you think the New York Jets could target out of the XFL? Who are some of the players? Because I have a number of players in their own backyard that played for the Guardians that I think could be impact players for the Jets this year.
Yeah, there are two corners that I really love from the Guardians that you mentioned. It Jamar Summers obviously goes without saying, and the guy who's under the radar was really terrific was Anthony Tejada. Those two corners right there in Texada, those two corners right there were fantastic with Guardians. I'm surprised Summers, who continuously plays at a high level, he did it in the Alliance for American Football and obviously did it in the XFL. Surprised that he's not an NFL roster. The Jets could use corner help. They did a good job addressing that with Bryce Hall and obviously trading for Quincy Wilson. And I think Texada is probably the kind of player that's going to be overlooked because of his size. But longtime Jets fans will remember Aaron Glenn and Ray Mickens, who were Texas corners that were undersized, who had long NFL careers. In the case of Aaron Glenn, he was a multiple-time Pro Bowler. So I think Texada is that kind of player, and he's just fantastic. And he had a great college run, too, at TCU and Gary Patterson's defense, where they just leave corners out on an island. So those are two players I can think of that could help the Jets. The Jets have done a lot to help their roster, but they could use some more cornerbacks as far as I'm concerned.
I definitely agree there, and I do like that was a very underrated move that Joe Douglas made, trading that last sixth-round pick for a former second-round pick in Quincy Wilson from the Colts, a very young player that if you can tap into that upside, you're looking at a second-round talent for a sixth-round swap. That's a heck of a deal that he made, and also helping provide depth there. I think the Jets still need a little bit of receiver depth, and I think the Guardians receivers were very underrated considering how inconsistent the quarterback play was until Luis Perez took over those last 2 weeks. That was a receiving core that was constantly creating separation between Colby Pearson, Mikhail McKay, Teo Redding, and even Austin Duke at times. I thought that those receivers could make some sort of noise in the NFL. And looking at the Jets, you got a receiving core that is still very much a question mark. Even with the sign of Denzel Mims, he's still a pretty raw talent. So there's still not that bona fide one or even number two that you can really hang your hat on.
Right, and the Jets could really use a physical wide receiver. There is a wide receiver in the XFL that stood out to me. That's a physical wide receiver that has size, that can breaks tackles in the open field. He actually reminds me a lot of Quincy Enunwa, who unfortunately is a huge question mark because of his history with injuries, and that's Dan Williams for the Tampa Bay Vipers. The problem with players like Dan Williams, who's one of the top 4 wide receivers in the entire XFL, the problem with guys like that is, unfortunately, NFL teams have a little bit of a bias towards players that are 25, 26, 27 years old. They'll tend to overlook them, and Williams has been up and down the block with a lot of different NFL teams. He's never been able to stick. He's another one of those guys that doesn't really have special teams value as a 4th or 5th or 6th receiver. So the Jets could use a physical wide receiver, somebody who can help out Darnold in the red zone, somebody who can make plays all over the field, break tackles. So they certainly shouldn't be done, and they should be looking for somebody because they have enough speed now with Harriman and Mims, and obviously, they have Vincent Smith, another 6'3" guy who can run really fast on their roster. So they just could use a physical receiver. Somebody can break tackles in the open field, make plays over the middle of the field, and make plays in the red zone.
Yeah, another player, too, that when you're saying that type of characteristic in a receiver, I was thinking Trey McBride, a guy who actually spent some time with the Jets in Sam's rookie year, and I thought had a very, very good preseason. I actually thought he was going to crack the team, but like you said, I don't think he provides that special teams factor, and when you're the number, like you said, 3, 4, 5 receiver, you need to have that special teams sort of characteristic in order to crack a roster. So that I can understand why he's still there too. Speaking XFL though, today was supposed to be the day, supposed to be the championship game. We were supposed to be watching the culmination of year 1 of what was a very successful product. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we're robbed of that. But did the Chapter 11 bankruptcy, as opposed to the Chapter 7, the AAF, leave you a little bit optimistic about a future?
I'm in between on this one, and yet it is unfortunate that today would have been the XFL championship game. As far as your question, I'm a little in between on it because I think if anybody were to buy the assets, trademarks, name, etc., team names, would they consider repackaging the league together and not branding it, not buying the XFL brand, which was, like, to me, the XFL brand was damaged prior to the relaunch. And somehow Oliver Luck and the entire team there, they rebranded the league and they won people over because a lot of people, rightfully so, I guess, had their nose in the air about the way the league used to be. And so if anyone were to come in now and buy the XFL, would they relaunch it as it was or try to brand it in a way where it's their own? So I don't know. Like, there is a market for it. There is a place for it. I fully believe in the concept. I hope that someday it works. It's all a shame right now. It's not the right environment or time to launch a new league. We don't know when sports leagues will resume or in what fashion they'll be. Looks like without fans in attendance, at least for a little while, if we get to that point. So, yeah, it's tough all around in terms of the XFL. Like, you know, with today would have been the championship game. They would have gotten a nice rub from the NFL draft, obviously being on ESPN, because there would have been a lot of commercial time and a lot of hype for today's game. So it's stuff that I haven't gotten over yet. And so it is a difficult situation to put a finger on and think about what could the future mean. It was a league that might have ended at some point, but not, and we never expected it in this type of fashion.
Now, I had a point or an idea, I guess you could say, in my last episode, where I thought that if anyone were to buy the XFL, why not the NFL? And I laid out reasons why, as in the NFL could own the product, they can have it as a separate game, like the way the innovations of the league with the new rules, the kickoff, and all that stuff. You can have that separate entity, still part of the NFL name, and you could even involve it as more like a minor league system since the NFL doesn't have one, and you can get some of your practice squad guys getting some real reps against other professional teams. I thought that was an idea that maybe the NFL should throw around. What do you think about that?
It's definitely something, as a writer, it's something I've been writing about, questioning, kind of had writer's block on it because I have conflicting opinions on it. I think the NFL should do it. Whether or not they'd want to do it under the XFL name, that's another story. I don't know if you can recreate what the XFL was. I mean, once the XFL was independent of the NFL, and it was an innovative league that operated away from the National Football League and was kind of doing things their own way, and for the betterment of football. I think you can see from the technology and all that. I don't know if the National Football League would want to inherit or adopt a brand. I think they'd want to have their own type of system. And the way the XFL was set up, they were trying to make it a viable standalone pro football league. And the NFL, if they were to take on that task, they would need to present it in that way rather than treat it like a minor league. As soon as you treat it, minor league sports are great, but as soon as you treat it like it's a minor league, people ignore it and they don't give it the attention that it deserves. And that's the thing that the XFL had going for it. They were trying to be a viable, they were trying to be the second best pro football league on the planet. And and they're on their way. And the NFL, if they do it, they need to present it as a viable, standalone pro football league that has a lot of the same elements that the XFL had. They need to capture that. Now, the NFL could decide to buy, and maybe resurrect these teams. I don't, for some reason, I don't see it as likely. I'm hoping I'm wrong on that.
Yeah, I feel like there was still hope. And when Chapter 11 originally, I was thinking, okay, he's just looking for different ways to pay out his creditors, and they'll figure this out, even if it takes another buyer, somebody that could partner something. But when the financials came out and I saw how much of Vince McMahon's WWE stock was involved and how much that's taken a hit, I mean, luckily for him, they've been able to still put out shows at the Performance Center with no fans. But when I saw the hit that WWE was also taking and they were involved in this, that left me like, he's not going to ruin his baby, his own, the WWE stock for a second venture. I felt like that, to me, is when I was like, maybe he's not coming back with it, and it is going to take somebody like Vince to fully go all in, or like we mentioned, the NFL.
Yeah, we saw we saw with Vince McMahon and his company, his board of trustees were basically they pushed towards the XFL being shut down, and you got a ship that isn't sinking but is on the verge of sinking, and they had to pick and choose what they were going to throw off the boat there to keep it afloat. And the XFL, unfortunately, the canceled season really hurt them because the league was always going to be operating at a loss in year one. Most startup businesses do, and pro football leagues are extremely expensive. The league was going to be in the red about $44 million, but by canceling the season, they lost $27 million in game day revenue. And so that money would have been an asset towards keeping the league afloat and paying salaries and paying the venues that they owed money to and everything else. And once they were canceled, they lost that. They lost that ability. That money was going to be used to float the league into year two. And so that's unfortunate how things worked out there. And it's ironic because back in 2001, Vince McMahon had to pick and choose, was going to continue on the XFL despite NBC leaving and taking $50 million with them. But the networks that Vince McMahon had the WWE on were trying to leverage him and trying to get him, trying to use the situation against him. So he had to pick and choose between his own company and the XFL. And then unfortunately, he had to pick his own company there. So yeah, it's ugly all around. It's gotten really ugly. It's difficult seeing the face of the league and Oliver Luck, who was such an asset to it, be in a situation where he was terminated the night before layoffs, and now he's suing to try to recoup some of the money that he's owed. You didn't think it would. It's ending on an ugly note. It's a shame because it was the right league at the wrong time.
Absolutely, and you make a good point there. And that was my first thought when Oliver Luck's news came out that he was going to be suing Vince McMahon and the XFL. If you asked me that in December or even January, I probably would have been like, not shocked at all that this is the headline that I'm reading in April or May. But the fact that we had those successful 5 weeks and just the buzz and everything around it, I am completely shocked that it's gotten to this ugly point, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's you never would have expected it, to get to the point where Oliver Luck, who was the biggest backer of the league, the biggest voice for the league, is suing Vince McMahon for money owed there and all that. But it's what it's come to. It was a great league while it lasted. I don't know if it's going to reform. I hope it does. I hope I'm wrong, but I just think it's right league, wrong time.
Man, that's some great insight. And Mike, I just want to say thank you for coming on the show. Everybody, you can follow Mike's stuff on Twitter. He's at MMFB Writer on Twitter. And again, he does some great work for Overtime Heroics and XFL News Hub, and I'm sure there's more down the line. Mike, again, thank you so much for coming on and giving us all that insight.
Thank you very much, Alex. I appreciate it.